Okay, let's get started. And then folks can join when they're ready. Cool. Welcome back, everyone. Let's start with our first chant. So let me share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Om. So the reason why we do this verse is to prepare ourselves for the study and for this class so that our mind is ready to go from darkness to light. Uh, all right. So I think at the last class we are in chapter 5 and we left off on verse 15. We finished verse 15. This is 12. So let's read the 15 English again. So I guess we were talking about the world and how there isn't much of agency. Um, I think verse 14 was talking about agency and how there's not, there's no real individual agency. Like, we all are acting out of stuff that happened from the past. Like there's a cause and effect relationship to whatever is happening in the now. And because of things in the past, we have tendencies and desires and impressions and all of the, and depending on what our state of the mind is in the past, it determines how we act in the present. So if we had an experience where we were really, when we talked about the three states of mind, so we were in the tamasic state, which is like, in the state of aversion, then some things in the present may, trigger that feeling. Similarly, in the past, if we had feelings of craving and activity and wanting to get it because we thought that's where the happiness is, in the present we have some desires which are like that, right? Where we want it because we think we need it, without which we cannot be happy. So essentially, there's no individual sense of agency. The agency is this greater, um, you know, impressions, and they're called sankalpas, and how we were, engaging with the world while those experiences were happening. So, what was our state of mind? So, those things determine our agency. So there's no individual agency. So I cannot just say I want to choose this over this, right? Like how many times have we tried to get over a habit or something, and it's just very hard because our individual agency isn't enough. There is a greater sort of uh, thing that's operating, which makes us choose the things that we choose, and that's the force of the past and the state of mind in which you were doing it. So it's very simple if you just remember those two aspects, which is the force of the past acting in happening in the now, and then what was my state of mind while I was doing those actions in the past that have caused the impression. So depending on what that state of mind is, the impression is going to be very deep or not very deep. Cool. So that was agency. And then we were essentially talking about how ignorance is developed. Or rather, why do we even not know that there's ignorance? Because the problem is that, the self is always shining. There's no moment when the self is not, right? So the example I think I used was, the sun is shining, but for some amount of time there's cloud cover. And because of the cloud cover, I cannot perceive the sun easily. And only by removal of the clouds, I get the direct perception that, oh, there is a sun there. But until that cloud gets cleared, I'm never truly going to have that experience where I say, yes, there is a sun. There's always going to be some doubt, because if I've never seen the sun before. So it's kind of like that, where we have never really seen the self without any sort of coverings, and because of which we think there is no self. But the self is always shining. And the only thing that needs to be done is removal of the clouds, because once the clouds is removed, the sun naturally appears. It's the same thing with the self. The only thing that needs to be done is the volume level of the thoughts have to go down, because those are the only thing that get our attention. So all we're doing is we have the sense of attention that is always on. We are attentive about something, right? Like in our experience, we're either thinking about something from the past, or we're thinking about the future, or we're just in the now. So we're just in the now, we're having an experience. Maybe you're in class now, so you're like, looking at the laptop or the phone or the screen. So your attention is somewhere. It's always on something. So what we're trying to do with this work is essentially reduce the volume level of all of the other things. So like you may be having also in the same time some thoughts that are coming up. You may be having some sensations that you're thinking about, or some emotion that you're having. So all of those are additionally stuff that your mind can focus on. And what we want to do is we want to like not essentially suppress anything, but put our attention to something else. Because when the moment we put our attention to something else, those other things naturally dissipate. And once that happens, it's almost like the clouds are parting, and you're going to get a direct perception of ourselves. Cool. So that's where we were. And I think we're going to continue with the same idea. So would anyone like to read the English today?
If no one else, I'll volunteer.
Sure. Thank you, Gavan. So, all right. So let's do verse 16. Jnanena tu tadagyanam yesham nashita atmanam tesham ditya vigyanam prakasha yati tatparam.
But to those whose ignorance is destroyed by the knowledge of the self, like the sun, to them knowledge reveals the supreme Brahman.
So here we are sort of getting the same sort of idea that I was talking about in the previous verse, which is ignorance. The root cause of the antidote of ignorance is knowledge. So if I don't know something, the only way to cure that is to experience it directly and know it, right? So if I don't know what a mango tastes like, the only way I can know that experience is to actually go through eating a mango. Until then, I will only have ideas about what the mango is like. And the moment I eat the mango, all the things that I read, like, oh, mango is sweet and it's like got some texture, all of those things become a direct reality. Like I don't need to read anything anymore, because I know and I can explain it myself because I have experienced it. In the same way that if I have a direct experience of the self, that knowledge of that experience destroys my ignorance, because from that point onwards, I don't have to like think about, oh, what's it like to be me, or like, uh, all of what we have described so far will become a living reality. And nothing else needs to be done, because knowledge is itself self-revealing, as the phrase that is used in some of these books. So how do you know you are you, right? So like every time we wake up in the morning, we have this experience that I exist. We may doubt whether we're still awake or we're still dreaming, just in those moments when we just wake up, there may be a doubt that, is this a dream, or is this am I on my bed? So after maybe looking around, you may be like, oh yeah, I'm actually back in my bed. So in those moments, before our mind even is active, there's a small amount of time when we are sort of without any sort of um, uh, judgments about what's happening. It's just like, oh, I'm awake, right? So that feeling of I am is very strong. And in those moments, you know you are, right? Like I am. I'm all, even when I'm awake after, I know I'm always there, right? There's never a doubt that I don't exist in the moments when I'm awake, or even in the moments when we're dreaming. There's still this experience that I am. I'm seeing a different world, and in the dream that may seem very real and we may participate in it, but the feeling that I am is always there in every moment of our waking. Because without that feeling, or I won't even so much call it as a feeling, but it's more of an experience like this. We are always eyeing. We're, I am this, I am that, and on that I, we sort of attribute, feelings about, all of the sort of um characteristics of the mind and the body, right? So like, if I'm feeling very tired, I would say I am tired, but there's always an I in the front, right? So the I is essentially illuminating. So there's always a sense of illumining. So something is being illumined. So in this case, tiredness is being illumined, or drowsiness is being illumined, or sleepiness is being illumined, or like happiness is being illumined, or sadness is being illumined. So there's always something being illumined. So the I is sort of the precursor to it all in every experience, because without that I, there would be no experience. So I, in this case, is always self-revealing. It's always revealing stuff. And when there's nothing to reveal, it reveals itself. So that's kind of how the moment we have that experience, that flash, uh, immediately ignorance is destroyed. It's kind of like, we're in a dark room and we shine a light, and the moment the light switches on, the darkness is gone. There's like nothing additional that needs to happen. So that's kind of the same analogy here, which is the moment the moment knowledge dawns in the mind and we have that experience, ignorance is immediately gone. There's nothing else that needs to happen. So there is hope here. There's like saying that it can happen. Like, all that needs to happen is the mind sort of losing its deep sort of attention and insistence and involvement in whatever the mind is perceiving, right? In the form of like memories and thoughts. Like if we can get to a place where those things are no longer grabbing at us, then this is a consequence. The mind quietens down and the ignorance goes away. The supreme is revealed, which is my own self nature is revealed, and that is the supreme, because that's all that we are all seeking, unknowingly or knowingly. And that's what happens. Any thoughts about this? Okay, let's do the next one. Tadbuddhasya tadatmana tashtannishasatpayanaha gacchayanta puranavrit jnanan nidhuta.
Intellect absorbed in that, their self being that, established in that, with that for the supreme goal, they go whence there is no return, their sins dispelled by knowledge.
Cool. So now we're getting a new word, I guess that. I don't know if you've ever seen this here, but essentially in the Upanishads, which are, the concluding portions of, the Vedas, which are these ancient books, which are written mostly on like the physical world, about like, different aspects of it, like, health and wealth and rituals, all these different things. But always in each book, there's these concluding portions called the Upanishads. And in the Upanishads, only topic under consideration is what is the nature of supreme reality, which is what is the nature of this universe and what is my relationship with that. That is the only topic. And there's these different Upanishads, and the language is usually very sort of, I wouldn't say cryptic, it is very terse and dense, because they don't want to use additional words. I guess that was just the style back in the day, where there was no need of saying more than what is necessary, because the more you say, the more confusion it becomes. So the best way is silence, but most people cannot learn in silence. So the next is like, how can I say the least amount and not confuse people? So here that is essentially like talking about the ultimate reality. Because the moment we say and give a name to something, like if I say God, for example, now everyone's understanding of God is going to be different, right? So which is why they don't use God. They just say that. Because the moment you say that, you're not giving additional like descriptions or like that tends to like make the mind a little bit more active. So that is a very sort of word that we use, which is the ultimate reality. And this, when we say this, it's like, you know, the world that we are perceiving. So there's this great saying, which is you are that, which is you, who you really are the ultimate reality. So it's called, you know, the Sanskrit is tattvamasi. So you may hear that in many places or like in posters and stuff. But essentially what's that saying is that the nature of you is that, which is you are ultimate reality. So here we are sort of given that word, which is that, and we're given the process of what happens and how do we sort of get absorbed in that, right? So the first idea is like intellect absorbed in that, which means that my mind is just like resting in that place, which is, you know, the moment my mind's attention is like not on my thoughts, not on my desires, not on my physical body sensations, and maybe I have some pain or something. All of that is no longer there. My attention is now introverted, where I'm not paying attention to the stuff. I'm paying attention to where is this sense of awareness coming from. So it's that. So my intellect is focusing on that. So it's absorbed in that. You know how we get lost in a book because it's so interesting? Same idea. You know, that's the same idea. We are almost absorbed in the book when we're reading a really interesting book. So we are absorbed in that. And then because the self is that, right? The self is nothing but ultimate reality. So the self being that, and because the intellect is established in that, uh, and the intellect knows that that is the supreme goal of life, which is I want to experience this ultimate reality, because all of what I'm doing in this world is not going to give me really what I really want. Can it give me some temporary happiness? But the ultimate goal is if I experience myself in its purest form, there is freedom. Because moment I see that, this world becomes no longer an issue. So the mind is very clear about that. Um, and once we get absorbed there, uh, there's no return, in the sense that, you know, we realize that we were never the body, we were never the mind. It was all an assumption that we never really looked at. And because we have now this direct experience of that, uh, their sins here being that, you know, we all think that, you know, my body has these issues, I've done all these things in the past I'm not proud of, or I have these faults and flaws. All of those things, they dispel because we realize that we are not the body and we are not the mind. The limitations and the faults can only belong to the physical, right? So the body may have issues, the mind may have issues. They're all limited because they're physical and they're bound by space and time. Our body is alive only for some amount of time. Our mind is sharp only for some amount of time. You know, when we get older, our mind is going to become slower, right? So, but the self is beyond the physical. So once we realize we're the self, all the sins are basically dispelled. And that's what happens. That's the consequence of it. So we don't have to do anything to dispel the sins, but that's what happens. Any thoughts about this? So the practice here is that, you know, keep focusing, doing single pointed attention, and getting the mind trained or like reconfigured so that it can pay attention to a single thing and get absorbed in any activity. Because if we can start to do that, we are making our mind uh, more in our control. And that's what we want to do. Because the moment we have our mind in our control, we can tell it to pay attention to different things. So the moment we feel that something is bothering us in this world, which is, our habitual tendency to like pay attention to it, we can say, no, I want to do something else. So we want to get there where we can just like not keep getting dragged by the world's insistence on wanting us to pay attention, right? So like some people, for example, like they cannot help themselves and have to keep shopping, for example. Like the moment they see some ad, they have to like buy something, right? And that's because their mind is too strong and their desires are too strong and their mind is too pure in that way, where they're not able to control their minds. So once we start to build a sense of control, we can start to get a little bit more, we can start to be like more, we can own our mind rather than it owning us, right? So that's sort of the flip that happens, where the mind becomes a tool to do stuff and we just don't get swayed so easily. So once that starts to happen, then we want to get to this other place, which is, can we keep turning our attention to the source of who we are? And once that happens, the intellect gets absorbed even in that. Just like how we get absorbed in a book, or we get absorbed in a movie, or we get absorbed in music, our mind has the capability of just getting absorbed. So we want to get absorbed in that, and that's what happens. But to be able to do that, we need to have some stability in our mind and control of our minds. And the process of getting there is like doing single pointed attention and meditation and all of the practices that we have done so far. Any thoughts about this? Okay, cool. This is getting fun. All right, next verse 18. Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Shuni Chaiva Vyapake Cha Pandita Samadarshinaha.
Sages look with an equal eye upon a Brahmana endowed with learning and humility, on a cow, on an elephant, and even on a dog and an outcast.
So here, it may sound like it's classist and casteist, and I guess at the time it was. The society was had a caste system, so we must look at this book from the context in which it is written. Um, and at the time, I think this was what, maybe like 1500 BC or something, and um, there was a caste system, and very different than how we understand the caste system today. But essentially, the caste system at the time was more about what is the qualities of mind, right? So today it's sort of more about birth, but back in the day, at least the original intention of it was, in society we need to identify what kinds of minds people have, and based on that they would be, they would have a vocation, and based on the vocation they would be useful to society. So it was sort of a way to classify what kinds of minds people have, and it was never static like it is kind of how it has changed over the years. The original intention was like, if you had a more sattvic mind, which is a mind of uh, fewer thoughts, then you could potentially be spiritual, and you can teach people this truth, right? Like, so that was sort of, you could be that was the Brahmin class. But like, if you were more of like a person with a lot of desires and wanted to accomplish things, then you were probably a person who would want to start businesses. So like, that was sort of the original intention, and then eventually it kind of degraded and became what it is, which is terrible. But that was the original idea, and you could move, based on like the effort that you put in, you could move from being extremely from a tamasic state of mind where you don't want to do anything, to a more rajasic state, to a more sattvic state. So that was this sort of dynamic aspect of your mind. And before, like these kinds of spiritual truths were said, there were these rules about how a religious person needs to act, for example. So I think there's like something about how a religious person who is, I guess, practicing and doing a bunch of rituals has to look at a person who is another religious person with a greater love than, let's say, a a dog, right? Or a cow, I don't know. So there was like these differentiations. And what this is saying is that a person who has realized the self, all of those things are gone because they don't see a distinction between, a cow or a dog or an elephant or a human. All of them are the same in terms of they just see the self in everything, and they no longer perceive the physical appearance. And because of that, then everyone is as important as everyone. Like there's no sort of special treatment that they do. uh, so that's kind of the idea. And this is a consequence. It's not something, I mean, we can strive to say, yes, I would treat everyone equally. Those are sort of like, we get these commandments, and treat your neighbor like your family member or whatever, however we different cultures sort of say these things, but they never really work, because it's easy to say something, but when it comes down to it, how are you going to act? And what here you're saying is that the sages, that's like their nature. Like they don't have to like remember that this is how I need to act. It's just like that's their natural way of behaving. And whoever comes, ask them for something, they help them if they can. um, so any thoughts about this one? So this not, I guess this is pretty easy. And but yes, I am, we must acknowledge that there is a caste system, and it is what it is, and we have to get away from it. But this was written, also look at this book from the context of when it was written as well. Any thoughts and questions? Okay, let's do the next one. Ihaiva tarjita sargo yesham samye sthitam manah nirdosham hi samam brahma tasmad brahmani te sthitaha.
Even here in this world, birth, everything is overcome by those whose minds rest in equality. Brahman is spotless indeed and equal. Therefore, they are established in Brahman.
All right, so this is a pretty deep sort of, I mean, it has a lot in this verse. So, we're talking here about birth, right? So birth is overcome, which is interesting because, when we look at birth, you can look at it as, the birth of the physical body. You can look at it as birth of thoughts. You can look at it as birth of like my ego self. So like, at every moment when I get triggered, my ego is being, I guess in this case, being birthed, right? So, so there's different aspects of what is being born. And something is born, it exists for a while, and it eventually dies. Like that's the nature of this world. That there's always birth happening, and there's some amount of time for which that thing exists, and then it dies. So birth and death are like the two faces of the same coin. Like you cannot have one without the other. And here we're talking about freedom, and we're talking about freedom from birth. So then the question can come is like, okay, if I'm no longer being born, what does that mean? Does that mean the body stops being born? uh, and the answer to that is like, the if the identification is with the body, then birth is always going to be there, because whatever is physical is always going to be born, and whatever is born eventually dies, and then something new comes up, and then something new is born, right? So the birth and death aspect is always there for the physical. So if your identification is at the physical level, then birth and death is a consequence of it. But if our identification is beyond physical, which is I am the self, which is always there, there's no birth, there's no death for the self. It is deathless, it is changeless. Because it's changeless, it is birthless and deathless. So right, birth and death can only happen to something that changes. But if something never changes, there is no sense of birth and death to it. So that's where sort of our identity shifts, where I'm no longer identified with the physical, I get identified to the one that's beyond physical, which is the self. And because my identification shifts for that to that, birth is overcome. And when here everything is because all of our issues are because of the essentially the fear of death, because like, and death here doesn't mean just for the physical death of a relationship, death of something I do I cherish, like a physical object, death of a job that I really like. Everything has an end, right? So if our identity is on the physical, then there's always, we're experiencing birth and death all the time. But if our identity shifts, birth and death disappears, because we are no longer identified with whatever we are perceiving. And then, and how does that happen? Is because my mind is, again, like from the previous word, it's resting and it has become absorbed in the self. And equality here is that the self is equal in the sense that there's nothing other than the self. So there's nothing other than, so it is equal in the sense like the self in you is not like the self in me. It is the self in me. So, the same self shining in you is shining in me. Same self shining in me, shining in a plant. We are all that. And once we realize that, then, all of these things sort of drop. And the word we use is Brahman. So Brahman is spotless and equal. So like it has no distinctions, no changes, uh, and because of that, when we get established in Brahman, and here established means that the mind keeps going there, because the problem is in our minds, not in Brahman. So like right now, our identification is that I am this mind, I am this personality, I am this body, and that's an idea that we have. And that idea is being born moment to moment, right? So I may tell you, no, you're not the body and not the mind, but then you may have an idea which is being birthed in the sense, right? It's being born. So it's being born now and saying, no, I'm actually this body. But then I may say, no, you're not this body. So this idea may go down, but then again it may come up. So this idea is constantly being created in a way, by us, because we have not had that direct experience of I'm not the body and mind. And the moment that happens, we may have it in flashes in the beginning, and our mind may feel it, and it may go more towards it. It may go more towards it, and at some point, it gets absorbed in that place. And once it gets absorbed, for some amount of time, we need to keep going there, because we have some mental tendencies that we have to destroy, because our mind kind of has this deep-rooted belief that it's not. So even when we have that, initial, let's say, moment where we know that we are not the mind and body, there are some sort of tendencies that still exist, and those have to be rooted out. And that's what we call being established. So we keep coming back to that place. We keep coming back once we have a firm understanding that, and firm, I wouldn't even say belief, but more like we are rooted in that experience. Once we get rooted, then all doubts are gone, and we get established. Uh, and so that's the process. Any thoughts about this?
Hey, Puneet, this is Ramya. I'm struggling with this concept a little bit because, you know, like, can you talk a little bit about the process it takes to realize, from realizing the self to realizing that the self is in everything?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know, as humans or creatures or whatever, we do good things for each other, but we also do really bad things to each other.
Yes.
And how is that possible if everything is the same?
Like, why? How is the fact that we continue to do bad things? Like, is that the
Yeah, like,
question?
yeah, I'm struggling with the concept because like, people murder others, people
Yeah.
hurt other people, but
Mm-hmm.
then we're supposed to view that as the same. Like, if someone really hurts me, how am I supposed to view that as, oh, this is the same self that's in me, that's in someone else? Like, I struggle with that
Sure.
concept.
I think one way to look at it is to look at why they did it, right? So like a person who is doing something to hurt somebody else is only doing it because they're hurting, right? There's no other explanation. If we look at our own lives and see, we may not go as far as murdering somebody, but if we yell at somebody, or we are, you know, mean, or something, or like disrespectful to somebody, it's only because we are feeling an emotion that is not comfortable, right? It is unpleasant. And that unpleasantness leads me to act in a certain way that is harmful to somebody else. That's our own experience. We don't have to like look, there's no philosophies here, right? Our own experience when we act in a way that was hurtful, it's because I was hurtful. Simple. So if somebody now, if you look at somebody else, they're not very different than you. And if somebody goes as far as to murder somebody, you can just imagine how much suffering that they have within themselves. So that's the sense of like compassion that you can generate. Now, when it becomes, if they direct it towards you, it's much harder, right? Because you are somehow being threatened. And sure, so like,
Yeah.
and if somebody is hurtful and harmful towards you, then there's other things that you can do, because then it becomes very hard to apply these teachings. But this is more about like just trying to understand this world and this nature, and like how people's ignorance about who they are and results in all of this stuff. So we are seeing that this world is a play of like these three states of like sattva, rajas, and tamas. So people who are in a rajasic state, which means that I'm greedy, I want it, and I will do anything to get it. I don't care about the consequences, right? Look at, I don't want to get political, but like look at a president of a country, right? Like don't care about the consequences, and I will get it because that's what I want. I want the best deal. So if that's our state of mind, the consequence is that it's going to result in somebody getting hurt, right? And because they're ignorant, that they think that's where happiness is, or that's where real success is. So that's the world, and we have to see it. And because it keeps happening again and again, all you can do is kind of laugh, I guess, at the fact that the world is like this, because people don't know who they are, and they keep making the same mistakes over and over again because they have the firm belief that this other thing now is going to give me what I want. This other thing now, and we keep going in this circle, right? I have a desire, I think it's going to give me happiness, and then I do something, and that causes harm to somebody else because I only cared about my own desire, and I may have gotten it, right? And somebody else is now suffering because of it, but I got it, and I'm feeling a little happy, but then it doesn't really give me what I want, and now I pursue something else. And the other person who has potentially gotten hurt, now if they are not sort of seeing the world in this way, they now have another sort of deep impression, and now they act out of like suffering, and they hurt somebody else. So it's this chain reaction that keeps happening, and that's the world. So we have to see very clearly that this is what the world is. It's nobody is doing it to you specifically, right? Like you are just a witness to it, and a witness to everyone's craziness, including our own. We are also crazy. It's just that we don't tend to be as critical of ourselves as somebody else, right? So if we start to see that the world is just pulsating with like people's like sattva nature or rajasic nature or tamasic nature in all interacting all the time, then this world is being born. There are moments when you feel really peaceful when you're doing something, right? Like maybe with your friends, or maybe at some close people at work, like, or like with family. Like there's all these moments when you feel really good. So that's the sattva aspect of the world happening. But there's some moments when you feel like, oh man, I really want something, and that's this is what I need in my life. That's the rajasic nature acting. So there's this play of these three qualities, and the tamasic nature is like, oh, I'm feeling really shitty, I don't even want to do anything today. So all of these things are happening for you, but it's also happening for everybody else. And the interplay of those three aspects causes the world. And somebody may, through that interaction, may want to harm you, and not want to harm you. They have a desire that they want to get done, and the consequence of that ends up being you getting harmed. But if you can see that they are so focused on their own desire that that's what they want, it's not that they want to harm you. So that's the shift that we can. So once we start to see that, it's like, oh, poor person. We can start to have a little bit more compassion of like, they're so deluded in their own desire, not realizing that this desire is actually going to not really give them what they want. It may look like they've gotten what they really wanted. But that's not satisfying, right? That's not freeing them.
Yeah.
It's like the desire will now result in some more desires, and they're going to be lost. And the person who's harming you mostly is also suffering, right? Like they're not very happily harming you. They're kind of not in a good place as well. So we can start to see that. And we can only see that when our own volume of the mind is not very loud. Because if our own mind is like, how could they do this to me? Don't they know who I am? All of these ideas. If that's very loud, then our mind is going to be there. So which is why we want to like move away from that and having some sort of control of our mind to say, okay, all these stupid thoughts are coming up. I will acknowledge it, but they are only coming up because in the past I gave a lot of importance to my own ego, right? The ego wants to defend itself, so it's going to come up. But instead, I will say, okay, I'm not going to focus on that right now. Focus on something else. So if you have some work to do, always work is very good because what it does is it puts attention on the work. So when you're feeling really angry, a practice usually is like clean the room or something, right? Just move stuff around where it's like you go back into the now, where the now is where we want to be. And because we start doing that, our mind starts to get retrained, where it starts to get a somewhat of an understanding that I don't have to indulge in everything that the mind throws up. It's an option. I can choose to do it. And most of these thoughts of like ego, defending the ego are not very useful thoughts to pursue. So we want to put our attention to something else.
Got it.
Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. Thanks, Puneet.
Cool. Thank you for that question. Great question. Yeah, it is not easy. The world is very shitty, and those people also need to, like, if somebody kills somebody, for example, they need to be put in jail. I don't think this is saying they are forgiven, but we are starting to see the motivations. And action and the consequences of somebody killing somebody is they go to jail, right? Like that's a no-brainer, because they're harmful and to society, and they need to be, I guess, reformed in some way. Cool. Any other thoughts? Okay, so let's do 20. Na prahashyate priyam prapya no dvijeta prapya cha priyam sthira buddhi rasammudho brahma ved brahmani sthitah.
Resting in Brahman, with steady intellect and undeluded, the knower of Brahman neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant, nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant.
So here we're continuing down the, when we are resting the mind on Brahman. And here we are saying the knower of Brahman. So, we can only say we want to rest our minds in Brahman once we get a taste of who we are. Until then, this practice is a little difficult. So it's kind of like, so this is essentially what we're talking about is like jnana yoga, which is the yoga of knowledge. And this is slightly difficult because, our mind needs to be somewhat in our control to be able to do these kinds of things. And the first practice that is prescribed is thought replacement, which is whenever a thought comes up, that an ego thought, I guess, in this case. So a thought like, I am, I'm a stupid person, or I'm a miserable person. How could they do this to me? Why am I the one who is suffering all the time? All these like I thoughts, which are not useful, we replace them with thoughts like I am Brahman, right? Or like I am not this limited ego. So what you're doing is like, there is this really large thought that I am this limited ego, and we're sort of trying to dismantle that thought by replacing it with something else. So it's called thought replacement. And that's a very moment to moment sort of activity, because because throughout our waking period in the day, there are lots of times when these kinds of thoughts come up, and we are kind of unconsciously they come up, and we kind of ruminate over them, and we build a story, and then that thought gets more energy, and then it goes away, and then we do something else. So with this practice, we are paying attention moment to moment, and we're seeing when this thought comes up, I will not go down the theme of that story. Instead, I will like say, I am Brahman, I am the self, even though I may not know what that is. But I will just keep saying I'm Brahman. So it's like an intellectual way of like dismantling this other thought that I am the stupid ego. Because that thought is only coming up because I gave it energy in the past. If we understand this simple fact that thoughts are just our own making, they are not come from anywhere else, then we can make new thoughts. That's the power of creation, sort of, the mystic symbolism here, where you can create your own reality in a way. So you're creating this new thought, and this new thought is a thought replacement. And at some point, what's going to happen is that the mind is going to get a taste and a flash of the infinite, which is like, oh, I am actually that and not this. And once that happens, we are given a new practice, which is called resting in Brahman. And some other I guess people call it abiding in the self, where my mind is abiding there. It's not thinking about anything, because it's essentially has this ability to just drop, where I can just step back and not really focus on anything. It's kind of like resting in a way. And that is a place we can get to, where I'm just hanging out with my own self. Like there's nothing around. I'm not really paying attention to anything around me, but I'm just hanging out. And that's resting in Brahman. And when this is happening, the mind is essentially like, just come home. You hear all these different phrases, but it's very hard to describe it because it's trying to describe an experience, right? Another analogy is, so we recently, I guess right now, there's the Navratri festival that's happening. And, at the end of the Navratri festival, like at least in the southern part of India, is the celebration of Dashara, which is, the 10th day. Navratri is like 9 nights. And on the 10th night, what you're celebrating the victory of the king Rama over, this other king, Ravana, who was in Sri Lanka. So there was this huge war that happened. And then there's Hanuman, who is the monkey king, who essentially plays a pivotal role in the war and stuff. And if you've ever seen a picture of Ram and Hanuman, it's either Hanuman is sort of bowing down to Ram and he's really blissed out, like very happy, and Ram is also obviously smiling most of the time. Or there's this other picture where Hanuman is hugging Ram, and Hanuman is also very happy, and Ram is also happy, and Ram is kind of like got this oh, I got you kind of hug, and Hanuman is like very happy to hug Ram. So that's always sort of the setting in which you see these images. And actually, if you look at the story, you can look at the story very literally, but you can look at the symbolisms, which is like Hanuman is a representation for our minds, which is our mind is kind of like a monkey, and jumps from one place to another place, and it's also very if we can sort of concentrate and make it strong, it can become like Hanuman, which is very powerful. It can accomplish things. You can tell it to go do something, it'll go do it. It has a lot of energy. It can lift a mountain. It can win a war, like all these aspects, right? And Ram is like you, which is the self. And when the mind comes home, which is when the monkey mind comes home and hugs you, monkey mind is blissed out. And so the monkey mind is resting in Ram, which is you. So all of these symbolisms that exist, and so the mind is always wanting to rest in Brahman. So whenever we are, getting what we want, our desire, object of desire meets the desire, and we get what we want, for a moment, our mind comes home, because our mind is freed from the tyranny of I want it, I want it, I want it. And for a moment, phew, like, I'm resting in that. And I feel blissful, right? We all have that experience where, wow, I got what I wanted. This was so good. And for those few moments, I'm not thinking of something else that I want. I'm just here. So the mind has come home. And that's what we mean by resting in Brahman. So we want to keep going there, at will, not through some struggling by like wanting some desire to come true. We want to do that at will, where we can just drop the insistence and the struggle of the mind, and we can come home. And once that happens, uh, with steady intellect and undiluted, so which is, that's how we sort of rest in Brahman. So the knower of Brahman neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant. So the world is going to give us what it gives us, right? So we may want to pursue a bunch of projects. They may either come true or they may either not come true. And when they do come true, they may be, in the past, you may be like, that's where happiness is, when the project comes true. But now, with this understanding that I am Brahman, you realize the world is nothing but you, essentially, which is, a reflection of you. So it doesn't matter if it comes true or not. You are going to be the same because your mind can rest in Brahman. It's like Hanuman is hugging Ram. You can go there. And because of that, when things don't work out, there's no reason to grieve because it's all Brahman. There is no place where Brahman is not. So if we realize that the truth is in Brahman, the joy is in Brahman, the bliss is in Brahman, and that's what I'm seeking. And once I realize that that's everywhere, then what is there to be sad about and what is there to be happy about? And some people I think we may go down this next verse where we may think that, oh, this life will become very boring then, like there's like no joy, ups and downs. And we will kind of discuss that no, in fact, it will become more, what do you call, intense and more full of expression experience, because this human body is the most sensitive thing that we have. So the more we get in tune with this, the more we experience this world. And the more we experience the world, the more beauty we see in it. So it's like this sort of vicious cycle. And that's why, this is worth pursuing. Otherwise, it would not be worth pursuing. And this is not a theoretical thing, right? And this can happen in this life. It's not some idea that, oh, once you die, then you will experience this. Absolutely not. This is right here, right now, immediately accessible. So if you're ready, they say, some people say, like, if you're ready, a rock can enlighten you in a moment, boom, because it's right here, right now. There's nothing outside, nothing extra that we need. Everything is here from our own experience. We are what we are trying to see is something in our own experience. So it's right here. It's not somewhere far away. So that's the beautiful aspect of this, which is it's right here, right now. And we can all go there. Any thoughts about this? All right, so let's do the next one. 21. Brahya sparshesh vasaktatma vidantyatmani satyukham sabhram yoga yukta atma sukham shayam shushnatnute.
With the self unattached to external contacts, he finds happiness in the self. With the self engaged in the meditation of Brahman, he attains endless happiness.
Cool. So here, we're basically getting an implication that the person still works, which is, it's unattached to external contact. So it means that this person is still seeing the external. It's not like the moment I realize the self, my universe disappears for me. Like I only see like blankness or something. No, it's like we still see the world, we still perceive it, we still interact with it, but we interact with it with a sense of like, I own nothing. I own nothing and nothing owns me. So there is a sense of freedom um, in a way that I can operate in this world. So it's kind of like, if you have ever had that experience where, a room is like full of stuff, there's bunch of junk that we've acquired all over, like, let's say like the last 5 years or something. And then we have a cleanup day. We just like get rid of a bunch of things, right? Like which we've never used, we've never really indulged in at all. And then suddenly we're like, wow, I feel kind of free, because like, all of this stuff I felt was like holding me back in a way. And now I just got rid of stuff, and my life is a lot simpler, and I have a lot more space, and I feel a lot more free. So it's kind of like that, where the entire like baggage and the burden of my attachments, my somehow my relationships, my work, my my ideas, my desires, all of them I was holding on to for no reason. It's almost like I had this huge weight on my shoulders and I was walking with it everywhere, not realizing that I can just put it down here and I can continue to do the same things, but without having to hold that baggage all the time. So it's kind of like that, when I'm no longer bogged down. And there's this sense of energy and sense of freshness in every situation, where I can, I can do a lot of work, but still be like not tired, because the mind and my identity is not in the mind and the body. I am never tired. The body may be a little tired, the mind may be tired. So that's kind of like how our experience starts to shift. And he says he finds happiness in the self, which is, that's where happiness is. So whatever project that I engage in, it comes true. Object of desire meets, and for a moment I get a taste of myself. So the taste of myself is available freely, because I have the ability now to kind of drop the mind, and the mind rests in the self. And the drop the mind here means that I'm no longer focused on like something external. I can have the ability to concentrate on that, see, on that self. And when that happens, it's so good. And that's where happiness is. And I can do that moment to moment. So in the beginning, there may be a period in our lives where we may stop engaging with the world because it feels so good to just engage with yourself. And that's the period of establishment that's happening, where we're getting rooted in this feeling and this process. And once we get rooted, then we can re-engage in the world, because then there is no fear of what happens and what doesn't happen. But that period of rooting is very important, because that's the process of like being engaged in meditation. So we want to get rooted, and to somebody else looking at you, it may be like, oh, this person is not doing anything, they're becoming lazy, their life has, but what you're doing is this really important process of like freeing yourself from all external things, so that when you come back, you can operate with the same stuff. Maybe you may come back to the same life, where you may go back to the same maybe relationships, jobs and all that, but now you will look at it with a sense of freshness each time, and engage with it, and look at it for what it is. And that's liberating and freeing, and that's where happiness is, because it's never ending. When are you not you? Once you realize that you are the source of happiness, nothing else, like not your family member, not your relationship, not your job, not the money, not your fame, not your attention, all of that, it is you where the source of happiness is. Then that is endless, because you are you all the time, and that is the promise and the end goal. So that's why we do this. Any thoughts and questions? Okay, let's do 22. We have some more time. Yehi sparshar shaja bhoga dukkhayornaya evate adhyantavanta kaunteya na teshu ramate buddhaha.
The enjoyments that are born of contacts are only generators of pain, for they have a beginning and an end. O son of Kunti, the wise do not rejoice in them.
So here we are given this sort of explanation of, like, the happiness in the world, where what we are taught from the beginning is like, oh, happiness lies in, like, getting a good job, maybe getting a good, like, house, getting a good car, all these, like, sort of material information that we are sort of given through in the form of advertising, in the form of social upbringing, all of that, right? Like, and we have a sense of ideas that this is what happiness is. This is obviously, going on a vacation and doing this trip, that's obviously where happiness is, right? Or like flying business class or something, right? Like all these ideas where we think happiness is there. But unfortunately, if we really look at it, we may feel good when that experience is happening, but they always end. So we have a vacation for a week, you feel very good for a week, and then on the last day you're like, man, the vacation is ending, now I'm going to have to go back to my life, or like whatever, I was trying to escape from some situation and now I have to go back to that situation, and it's feeling sad. So it's always, so if our happiness is sort of in the stuff, then that stuff is always has a limited amount of time. So we never want to, not never, I would say we want to see what is going on, because once we have that eye of wisdom open to say, oh, everything is temporary, and if I put my attention and my full expectation of happiness on the object, I'm going to be disappointed. And I do get disappointed. I feel good for some amount of time, but at some point it changes, and then I feel miserable, and then there is pain, right? Like this verse says, because they always have a beginning and end. So the wise are always looking for something that is beyond physical, because that is the only thing that can give lasting happiness. If anything that is bound by time is going to end, right? And if it ends, and if my entire happiness is dependent on that, then I'm going to feel miserable. And then, so what do we do? So we search for something that is beyond. So then, that's where our search begins, because once we have seen that this world cannot give me what I really want, then the search begins, which is like, is there something that exists? And like we've seen that there is, and there is a process to get there too. And this is why the wise, and wise here mean like, people who have become realized, they don't it doesn't mean that they don't enjoy things, right? Like, so if you're in a really fast car and you love fast cars and you're driving it, you'll enjoy it. But let's say you have only rented the car for 2 days. If it's gone, it's gone. Like, you don't keep crying about how you don't have it anymore. But that's kind of true about everything. Every object, every relationship, everything has a time, which is you enjoy it for how much, whatever time it's available, and it's going to end. Either you are going to die or the other thing is going to die. Like, that's inevitable. So once we see that is true, then our involvement with it will become even more, because it is only for a limited amount of time. And like, I want to engage with it as much as I can, in the sense of when it is in my experience, I'll give it full attention. So all the relationships, all your friends, all of that, cherish them, because it's all limited, and we can sort of enjoy it moment to moment. And if it's not there, it's fine. This, you can always come back to the self, and that's kind of what it is. Cool. Any thoughts about this? All right, let's do the next one. Shaktanoti haivaya, Shaktanoti haivaya sodhum prakasharira vimokshanat kamakrodha bhavam vegam sayukta sasukhi naraha.
He who is able, while still here in this world, to withstand, before the liberation from the body or death, the impulse born out of desire and anger, he is yogi, he is a happy man.
So here we're given an idea about uh, like more practical aspect of like, okay, all of this sounds very well and dandy, like, but how do I get there? Is it just some ideal state, like a utopian world, or like something that can only be done by like one or two people, like, only one Buddha existed or something, or, it's very rare. And here we're given this thing of like, actually, no, it's not very difficult. It's just that, a lot of people don't even know that this is possible, firstly. So it's like lack of awareness. Like a lot of people don't know that, you can invest in some money in the stock market and you can make money through that. Like it's lack of awareness. So it's only a very select few of people who are involved in Wall Street, and they're the ones who get very wealthy, not realizing how finance works, right? So it's a lack of knowledge about something that leads to not being able to obtain it. It's not that it's very difficult or something like that. It's just the lack of knowledge. So here also, it's like lack of knowledge in the beginning. And then the second is like, even after knowledge, you're like, I don't think I need it, right? It's not worth pursuing because I have all these other desires. We only have, limited amount of energy. So I will give energy to wanting fame and recognition. That's where I think happiness is. So everyone is sort of focusing on things that they, from their perspective, think is important, and no blame. And everybody gets to wherever they need to get to out of their own experiences, out of their own time. You cannot say like their, desires are not, worth having. Like from their experience, it is, and they have to go through them, and they have to have their own experience and realization and all of that. But once we get to a point that, okay, the world is kind of, I've had the experience of ups and downs. I've got some green lights in life and I've got some red lights in life. And is this it? Is this what the world can offer? I get some happiness, I feel good, and then after some time I feel shitty, and then I may feel good. Is that what the world is? So once we have that, and that can only happen if we have had some experiences, right? And we have got some maturity. You don't give this teaching to like a 7-year-old kid, because they have to go through their own life and have their own sort of experiences. So once we're there, then what do we do? And here, this is sort of the summarized teaching, which is, if we can control our impulses, and our impulses is like, I have to do this, right? That is the initial desire, which is, I have this deep desire and I want it no matter what, which is like our immature sort of desire, where like our insistence on like, no, I must have this. I remember when I was like in 6th grade at the time, uh, for my birthday, I wanted this shoe. It was like, like a Nike shoe or something. It was very expensive, and at the time, my parents weren't very well off, so it was like a very significant part of my dad's salary, and I was very insistent that I wanted this shoe. Now that I think about it, I'm just like, wow, I was just so uh, silly and stupid at the time. But that's how the world made me think at the time, right? Like the Nike shoe is the most important thing, and like I wanted to earn some street credit at the time. So so insistence that I do want it. And the shoe is one example, but we can look at our lives and say how many examples we have where, no, I must have it this way, I do not want it this other way. So that is the impulse, and it's very strong. So the entire process of yoga is to how to balance that impulse, to be able to set it aside, to acknowledge that it's there, but to not give in to it. And that's the yoga balam, which the word we use, which is the strength of yoga, where we develop strength, the mental fortitude, and the forbearance. Even though it may hurt, but I can bear it, and I can go past it. So that's the initial impulse. And then the anger is something interesting too, because in this work, we define anger as thwarted desire, which is, I have a desire and I'm expressing some effort in order to like make that desire come true. But in the way, there's something that has happened. Some obstacle has come in, right? And I'm angry about it. Like, why? Because it's not allowing my desire to be fulfilled. So it's like you're driving in, you're driving your car, you want to get to some place and somebody cuts you off. What has happened in that situation? It's like you wanted to get to some place, that's your desire, and somebody is an obstacle, has cut you, and now there's anger, saying this person has like somehow prevented me from doing, what I wanted, which is a free, wanted to go fast or whatever, right? So this is happening all the time. And like desire comes, we put in some effort gets blocked, I'm angry. That's basically it. Very simple. That's the structure. And it keeps manifesting in many ways based on like, the different kinds of desires we have. So once we have the impulse of being able to block both desires, strong desires, maybe that's too much, we cannot give it, but at least anger, we can start to block, which is when something doesn't work out the way I want it, I can be like, okay, everything is not going to happen according to my own puny plan. There's like other people's desires too. And there's always a fight. Whose desire is going to win? Is it my desire going to win, or the other person who also wants to go fast? So they want to cut me, right? So there's always whoever's desire is stronger is the one that wins. And that is from an external perspective. But even within our own bosom, we have multiple desires. And whichever desire is the strongest will always win. So a good example is like you're trying to lose weight or you're trying to do some exercise, but you also have, chocolate ice cream in the fridge. So now in one part of your mind is saying, oh, I want to be fit. And there's another part of your mind saying, I want chocolate ice cream. So which one is going to win? Whichever is stronger in that moment. So is your desire to become fit stronger, or is my desire to want ice cream stronger? And sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm going to eat the ice cream just today. So you get the ice cream. So that desire has won. And this is happening on a microscopic level, and this is happening on a macroscopic level, where there are desires everywhere, and they all have some energy. And whichever is strongest is the one that wins. And what this is saying is that if we can start to get a control these impulses, which are these egoistic desires and tendencies, which is I'll be happy when this happens, what about me? All these like limited ego and egoistic desires and desires that have like, anger associated to it. If we can control those, that's the only thing we have to do. That's it. All of this was a fancy way of essentially telling you that these strong desires and impulses of anger is the only thing we need to control. Because once we control these two things, everything else sort of automatically happens, which is my attention to like the world of objects kind of reduces, because those are nothing but impulses. My ability to get pissed off because something didn't happen the way I wanted to, that also goes. And those are the only two things which cause me suffering. If everything else, what's happening here is we are surrendering to the will of this universe, because we realize that it's way stronger than my puny ego. And then we're happy. That's it. I mean, that is all we have to do. So any thoughts and questions about this? Cool. If not, then I think we can do a meditation. Sorry, we're 5 minutes over. Got carried away. But let's do a quick meditation. Cool. So everybody, please sit up if you can. Sit up straight. And if you're feeling sleepy, you may leave your eyes open. Otherwise, you can close your eyes and just start by taking a few deep conscious breaths. And just noticing and making sure your neck back, and the top of our head are aligned in a straight line. And just gently scanning your body and seeing if there's any tension or strain that you're holding on to. On the exhale, just imagine that it's just being released. You just want to scan your body gently from the top to the bottom, noticing if there's pain or any sensation. There may be sensations of your clothes against your body. Could be sensations of the chair or wherever you're sitting. Just noticing. And what this is doing is it's putting you in a position of being a witness. And so much as it's more of a realization that, oh, that there is witnessing always happening. And our ability of our minds to pay attention and to move the attentive faculty from one part of our body, maybe, to another part. We have this ability to shift our focus and attention. So keep breathing, keep noticing your breath. But what we want to start to notice is the gap between the first breath ending and the next breath beginning. I just want to rest our attention in that gap. And if thoughts are coming up, or memories are coming up, or some planning is happening, just bring your attention back to the sensation of the breath. So it could be your chest expanding, sensations of the air coming out of your nostrils. Or try to see if you can pay attention to the gap. See if you can get a sense of just a wide space of consciousness in which we are experiencing the breath, our thoughts, the sensations, everything. They are the contents in the context that is this awareness. Keep bringing your attention back to the breath. If your mind is lost in thinking, no problem. Acknowledge it. Just gently bring your attention back to the breath. Sensation breath, sensation of your chest expanding. Keep your attention there, introverted. The space between the breath. Slowly bring your attention back to objective reality. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. So let's end this class by doing our ending chant. So feel free to sing along or just listen. Yogarato va Bhogarato va Yogarato va Bhogarato va Sangarato va Sangavihina Sangarato va Sangavihina Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chitta Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chitta Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva. So like what we kind of discussed this class, I feel like this verse was a lot more evident with today's class, which is we want to seek the self, because once we realize that the bliss and all happiness that we experience in the world is due to the self, then you can enjoy in company, you can enjoy in solitude, you can enjoy when you're passionately pursuing desires, or you can enjoy when you're renouncing them. In any situation, that person can enjoy, because she has a different dimension to experience herself. So I hope that is a reality for us all, and then we shall be free to do what we want and pursue all of our dreams and desires. Cool. That was the end of the class. As always, I'm happy to hang out and talk to anybody who wants to talk about anything. Could be anything related to this, or could be anything outside of this. But that's it. Thank you all.
Thanks, Puneet.
Thanks, Puneet.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Puneet.
Thanks, Puneet.
Thanks.
Thanks, Puneet.
Thank you.
Thanks, Govind, for the English reading. Appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure, pleasure.
Thanks, Puneet.
Thank you.